Thank you. Let's see which one works. Can you guys hear me? Okay, wonderful. All right, perfect. Thank you very much, Venk. And thank you also, Venk, and the TIE team for giving me the opportunity to put together this brilliant panel. We'll go through a round of introductions, but I do want to say one thing before we even start, that it's an honor to have panelists like these in one room. These are the who's and who's in the venture capital and startup world. There are people who probably wait sometimes months to get a half an hour meeting with some of these gentlemen. So it's truly an honor for myself, for Venk, as well as for the Thai community. Thank you, everybody, for agreeing to be on the panel, and thank you for taking the time for all of us. So we'll probably start off with a round of introductions, and Venk already talked about what I do. I'm an investment director at Intel Capital, focusing on big data and machine learning technologies. So I'll just leave it at that in brief. So I'll be moderating the session. Why don't we pass around this mic? Let's see if this works.
Does this work?
Let me start? Yeah, please.
Okay. All right. Well, my name's Nick Storielli. I'm the managing partner at a firm called Ignition Partners, which is an early stage enterprise software only firm. We're based in both Palo Alto and Bellevue. And I've been a VC for, 16 years now. I've probably been involved in 100 startups.
No? Let's pass this one around. This one seems to work.
Is this better? Just forget what I said. I've been a VC for 16 years, and then I was an entrepreneur before that for 12 years. I've been involved in probably 100 startups directly across 7 or 8 funds, almost exclusively in enterprise software, so B2B software places. We've been very active in big data, machine learning, topics that we're going to talk about tonight. Just probably the notable investments. I was the seed investor in a company called Splunk. It was 3 guys in my office. Spent 11 and a half years on the board there, all the way through the IPO to where it's over 2,000 employees there and over 10,000 enterprise accounts, and happy to talk about that journey. I was an investor in a company called Wit AI, which was an API for voice commands, which unfortunately Facebook decided to scoop up and is now inside of Facebook Messenger. We're an investor in a company called Trifacta, which does all the data prep for your machine learning companies, and happy to make intros if you want any help there. And then recently I put some money in a company called Unitive, which is a platform for hiring managers to do job description writing, interviewing, decision around who they should hire, and then promotions, all with the notion of driving cognitive bias out of those decisions. So it's a very interesting company. I'm very excited about it.
All right, well, hello everybody. My name is Kent Langley. It's an honor to be here today. Thank you, Sanjeet. And I am, let's see, so background, without going on too long, right? So probably 20 years professionally in the tech space, probably 30 years hacking around on computers and things like that since I was a little kid. My current companies are Echo, which is doing data science as a service primarily for marketing services organizations, which I know sounds a little odd, but it's very specific. And we're developing algorithms, online models, real-time data processing, primarily natural language stuff for delivering e-commerce advertisements into the Alibaba ad network in China, which I know sounds, it's like, how did that happen to a guy that lives in San Rafael? But there you go. There are funny paths we follow. I have a...
The world is flat.
The world is very flat. 1 degree of separation to everything. Additionally, I do a lot of consulting through my company Production Scale, primarily on data science optimization and enablement inside any type of organization. Doing, for just by way of example, so you know what I'm up to, I just did that for an agro-sciences firm to help use data science for optimization of feed formulations for cows, pigs, and chickens in order to drive more protein into the human food chain. So that's an example of that kind of work. And then lastly, I am a core faculty member at Singularity University, teaching data science and exponential organizations primarily to executives, board members, GSP students, and all of the various Singularity University programs. So, thank you.
All right. Thanks, and appreciate you all having me here tonight. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Great. I'm Sunil Dhaliwal. I'm the founder and one of the general partners at a firm called Amplify Partners. We're an early stage fund that exclusively focuses on enterprise infrastructure. So for us, that means data and analytics, including ML and AI, distributed systems and cloud computing and information security. That's all we do. Prior to starting Amplify 3-4 years ago, I was a general partner at Battery Ventures, where I was for 14 years. And I added up, and it actually means I shockingly have been doing venture capital for longer than you, Nick, which stuns me.
We're going to have a contest.
Oh, no, it's not a contest. It's a sad statement of my life.
You're aging better.
Yeah, so yes, scary enough that I've been doing venture for 18 years. All of my time has been focused on enterprise infrastructure. Early on, when big data was measured in terabytes, was lucky enough to be an early investor behind the guy named Jit Saxena, who started Netezza in a large-scale MPP data warehousing business, and that has expanded into other things that we've done lower down in the stack, infrastructure to enable people to deploy and run big data better. A company that actually we're co-invested with Nick on called Blue Data here locally behind Kumar Srikanti. And Intel, that's right, excuse me. Well, I know Nick's on the board. And the companies going up the stack like Cask, which is also shockingly with us, and Ignition as well, which is an app server to help people build big data, or Keen.io, which is an analytical interface. And then kind of moving way up the stack, we have a handful of things that are directly in the ML, AI space, analytic in the intersection of computer vision and healthcare, the company called Primer, which is text analytics, as well as a company called Scale Inference, which is a Google Brain team that's focused on data science or ML as a service. So happy to be here and happy to talk more about any of this stuff later.
Great. So my name is David Lamb. I'm with West Summit Capital. We're a growth stage technology venture capital firm. We have offices here in Menlo Park, where I'm the head of the U.S. office, and then we have a team in China as well. Most of our investments are here in Silicon Valley. In the last 5 years, 75% of our capital has been invested between Berkeley and San Jose. The remaining is invested in China. So we help a lot of companies here that we work with access China for various purposes, not only as a market, which has been around for in a very significant market for U.S. companies for many years, probably about a decade, but more recently, as you may have noticed with companies like Alibaba and others, there's a lot of capital from China coming here to the U.S., and we're very much a part of connecting the right capital partners with our portfolio companies. And of course, with the rise in IoT and a lot of the topics we'll talk about today, China continues to be the center of the global supply chain there. So we help a lot of our companies here in the U.S. Access that part of China to improve the profitability of their businesses. Some companies that we've invested in broadly in the space, some of my portfolio companies include 3D Robotics, which is a drone company in Berkeley, as well as on the IoT side, Movidius, which is a vision processor for mobile devices. And we also invested in Ninebot, actually with Intel, which is a next generation electric transport company that bought Segway here in the U.S. On the cloud side, we've invested in a number of different companies. We're co-investors with Sapphire in Mirantis, which is an OpenStack Cloud OS, and Intel too, and a number of other companies that we funded in the past. On the internet side, as we sort of see a lot of intersection between these three sectors, we funded Unity. We're the lead investor in the last round, and so they actually have their AR VR conference in LA today and tomorrow, so that's where I'm headed after this. So very delighted to be here and look forward to talking about a lot of different interesting topics.
So my name is Jay Das. I'm one of the MDs at Sapphire Ventures. One of the unique things about Sapphire that our LP, single LP, is SAP. So we raised about $1.5 billion from them. And in terms of the investments, we have been focused on data and analytics for a while. We are one of the investors in MySQL, in Greenplum, also in Jaspersoft. And since then, we have invested in a bunch of other companies like Looker and Alteryx. And one of the things that is more around machine learning and AI is a company called Narrative Science, which is based in Chicago, which basically takes structured data and actually generates natural language out of it. And we'll talk more about it.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Sanjit. My name is Frank Chen. I guess we're the new kids on the block. I work at Andreessen Horowitz. We started our firm June of 2009, so coming up to 6 years. We do any investment where software is eating the world. And if we look retrospectively at the portfolio, it's about half enterprise and half consumer. And we just love working with entrepreneurs who are using software to change their world. And these days, I have to say, machine learning is like, if I don't see the word machine learning in a pitch, I get a little suspicious because it's become all of the rage. It's kind of like SaaS was 5 years ago, maybe. But looking forward to talking to you about the companies and the trends that we're seeing. And I'll talk about the companies that we've invested in and how they're using machine learning sort of as we go along.
Great. I'll just speak up. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes. All right. I thought so. One of the things I'm going to try to do is, thank you. One of the things I'm going to try to do is, so we will start off with questions on machine learning and data science, but I also want to give a chance for you guys to see how the VC ecosystem works, and you probably saw a glimpse of that in the introductions. There are deals that people have done together, they know each other, so it's actually a small village, and that all looks nice and positive. I'll try to get into the darker sides as well. and starting with myself, absolutely, yeah. And it's a happy village. Looks like a happy village. And then I do want to leave enough room for questions so that it's an interactive session. To the last point that Frank mentioned about machine learning, we see that as a buzzword in a lot of the pitches. Are we really entering into a new era of hype cycle with machine learning? Or do you really see this as a hype cycle coming up, just like big data, just like IoT, these terms get formed? Or do you actually see some reality here? And if I sometimes ask myself how many machine learning applications I use, and there are probably a handful. Maybe you can give the examples of your favorite machine learning application that you use. And number two, talk about, are we really entering into a hype cycle? Nick, you want to start?
Yeah, my observation is it's both becoming a pervasive core technology in many applications and in many scenarios, and we're probably using it many times a day and we don't even know it. That's one. But the flip side is, I always say that Silicon Valley's central core competency is fundraising. And any buzzword compliancy test that gets traction, every PowerPoint presentation automatically absorbs it as though it's a virus. And that becomes sort of the narrative of how they're talking about their company. And so there is especially with artificial intelligence now, there is a very strong danger of too much hubris, raising expectations about what's going to happen in the short run beyond just the things that we know about, like autonomous cars and vehicles and drones. And so I think that we've been through how many cycles with AI. I can remember being in the 80s in the warehouse at a company called Technology, which was the great AI company that was going to change the world. And really what it was a wine advisor. If you inputted what you were eating for dinner, it would tell you which wine to select. And that was a $500 product, by the way. And so I think we have to be careful about, and it's incumbent on the investor group just to parse the pretenders from the people that are doing real innovation. But for us as an investor, how we tend to look at it is, what is the problem you are really trying to solve related to a business case that someone believes that there's value in? I think technology glory for its own purpose, hoping, coming out with a platform, hoping to find a use case, typically has a very dark struggle to try to figure out what their business is. And so if we've done ML plays or looked at deep learning plays, we really try to say, what is the use case that you're solving for from the business customer, and then work our way down to the platform.
Favorite app?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly, my kids love Siri. And so I am amazed at how I just watch them interact with it, and their facility, that's going to be that. You know, you see the YouTube video of the 2-year-old baby that's walking up to the TV that does this. Yeah. And you realize that we're not looking at the world the way they're looking at the world. And so their affinity and comfort with things that we think are kind of bizarre interfaces is going to be second nature. And so I would consider that just my favorite observation.
Yeah, I like the YouTube video of the kid opening a magazine and trying to pinch zoom.
Yes.
And it just doesn't work, right? And it's like, what is this thing? Yeah. Yeah.
Can I just do a quick one?
Oh, sure.
Just a friend came over to our house, and the kids were watching TV, and it's like, all they have is linear TV. I can't do anything. And I was like, oh my gosh.
What is that even? Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. All right. So, hype cycle, yes, right? But it's an old hype cycle with a new name, just like you were saying. Right now, more the rage is probably deep learning. But if you really dig into the roots of what deep learning is, it has its history decades ago. So I believe that we're on a very interesting hype cycle. If you take a look at sort of the exponential technology curve, right? We all know the S curve. Well, if you look at the first 30 years or so of that S curve, you saw artificial neural networks, then you saw recurrent neural networks, then you saw convolutional neural networks. Now it's all called deep learning, yay. But it's awesome because we have the compute power and we have the data available and the ability to move it and parse it that we never had before. So this does feel a little different to me. And you're seeing things like AlphaGo, which is a tremendous story if you read what they've done in the combination of multiple neural networks. So hype cycle, yes. Somewhat justified, maybe. But to your point, only if you're solving a real problem. And I resemble the remark about having built a platform first and then having to backtrack a little bit and get more specific, right? I've lived that pain and that darkness. So I know what you mean. The app that I absolutely adored, and it went away, was a machine learning app called Get Prismatic. It was a newsreader application that used advanced machine learning techniques to watch your Twitter feed and your friends' Twitter feeds in order to determine the things that it should suggest to you. And you could train it. And it was literally the best of the breed by a very large margin, but they couldn't build a viable business model around that algorithm, and they had to pull it back from the market and go do other things. Fine, I respect that, but I hate them because I really miss that app. And they wouldn't open source the algorithms either for whatever reason, so we all have to start over now. So yeah, those are my two there.
So I'll just try and build on that rather than cover a lot of old ground. So absolutely hype cycle, but hype cycle doesn't, that's not a terrible thing. It is our job to parse when someone comes to us and says machine learning, and what you kind of dig a little bit and you're like, actually that's just linear statistics. Like you've done the same thing, and you can't just call it machine learning and think that it's not just a regression. Like we know there's a big difference. And I think if there was one thing to take away on the what's different now, I think Ken just nailed it, which is the techniques and the conversations are old, but it has been the advances that we now have in distributed computing and distributed systems, both in terms of scale and cost, that make the actual ability to take these techniques and begin to use them to approximate a real deep multi-layered neural network, i.e. moving us in the direction of how our brain actually works to think about problems, that is going to start transforming things. And so we're super bullish on what's happening here in ML. We're super bullish in particular about what's happening in deep learning. There is objective data to back that up. There are actual records for the ability for certain systems to predict, the ability to draw intelligent conclusions, and those records are falling at an alarming rate. What was state of the state 3 years ago, 4 years ago is completely irrelevant now, and what the advances even in the last 12, 18 months are super powerful. we could talk more about that, but I would say tie that together with the statement of, so what? This is super powerful, this is super useful. Breaking a bunch of benchmark records and prediction records isn't a business. That isn't something that drives humanity forward. It isn't something that creates new markets. Much in the same way that Moore's law and the acceleration of computing power unlocked lots of things. It unlocked the ability for smart developers of applications to solve real-world problems. I think that's exactly what we're going to see with machine learning, AI, deep learning. They are not the end in of themselves. They are the means to the end, right? They are the substrate upon which intelligent application of problems will actually be achieved. And that's what's really powerful. So we've got a long way to go to create new primitives, right? How do we do machine vision? How do we teach machines to actually be creative or think or improvise? All these sorts of things are actually the function of deep learning, deep neural networks, and this is what's going to happen. But once we get those primitives, they're kind of useless until smart people like the people in this audience start deciding what to do with it. And that's why we're really excited. It's early innings, but there's more good stuff to come.
I would just add to what Sunil just said. I agree with that, and I think what I'm seeing with some of the companies that we work with is that this ultimately boils down to consumer adoption, and there is going to be new hardware and software that will need to be either bought by all of us in this room or and purveyed by various companies, and I think it's still unclear what customers are actually willing to pay for. Siri is great because it's already on your phone, and Apple isn't asking you to pay, buy a Siri sort of app for $200 and have some new hardware that you attach to your phone to make it work. So I think that when you think about deep learning and you think about machine intelligence and what that means, ultimately it does unlock a phenomenal number of new applications and new capabilities. But what I'm seeing is that in some cases the market research does not support, at least currently, customers actually wanting to pay for that. And so I've actually seen in a couple cases very big companies that I would consider leaders in machine learning that are coming out with new devices in the near future, actually pulling certain capabilities out of that product because the price point will get too high. So I think there's a learning curve there that we're all going to deal with, and I think it's our job to try to figure it out. But I don't think anybody has yet. In terms of the applications that I think are interesting, they're primarily, and I think based on what I just said, they're going to be more augmentations to what is already being done. So for instance, in the drone space, you're going to see drones that have detection of space and time and will understand where they are and will avoid things like people and other things that may not show up on a Google map photo that was taken 2 months ago. And you'll also see, I think, some next generation cameras that have some of this intelligence in them that will allow them to behave and do things that are very interesting, such as do some automatic editing and such like that of your product. So it's going to be a bit more evolutionary to begin with as the market figures out what people like us are willing to pay for and what we're not willing to pay for.
What was your favorite app?
Well, there's one company that's coming out with a drone that's going to be very interesting. I'll be buying that.
What's your favorite app? Well, I don't know how much to add to this because people have kind of hit upon all the stuff that look, machine learning is happening. It is baked into a lot of apps and a lot of products nowadays, right? Without that, anything that you might not be even aware of that there's machine learning going on behind the scenes. And I think there's a lot of things that will be addressed with machine learning. There's all the data about the genome, right? All the data that visually that Sunil was talking about. All of these things are all going to get better with machine learning. But one of the things that I do want to talk about, it's like there's already the media has started talking about, oh, these robots are going to come and are they going to rule humans in 5 years? That's kind of the tone all of a sudden that has popped up in the media, and I kind of think it's like journalists looking for a story. Yeah.
I think it's more like 15.
10, yeah, exactly, right. And it's kind of interesting. It's always been the case that the psyche of humans is to think that any new technology is going to come and replace the humans. And I think what's going to happen is just all of these technologies and the different ways as we get better infrastructure, more data to train all these algorithms. It's just going to go make our lives easier, just like Siri kind of does it. It'll be like, okay, it'll start small in the cars, right? It's going to warn you that you're, not in the same, in the lane, you're drifting off the lane and wake you up to a full-fledged car. So, and, they're not going to come and, so my point is that I think people don't even realize right now the effect all these technologies are going to have on humans. And, as us as investors, just have to figure out ways, to make, some money out of it and hopefully help entrepreneurs create great companies. And then I'll tell you, my favorite app is, I drive around in Bay Area and I don't know how I lived without Waze, right? I don't know if people use Waze or not, but, it's eerie that it tells you, even if you know an area that very well, it invariably tells you a better route than you would do it on your own.
So you want to know how I know there's sort of hype cycle around machine learning. Every deck I see has machine learning inside. And here's the trick you can play on people who put machine learning into their decks where they don't understand it. So you just ask them one question, which is, what machine learning techniques are you actually using on what data? And it's so funny these days, you'll be like, so many CEOs or even CTOs will be like, I don't really know. Marketing told me to put machine learning in the deck. So that's how you know there's a hype cycle. Having said that, look, machine learning is pervasive. It's probably more pervasive than you know. When you open up Facebook, the newsfeed is machine learning generated. When you're an Airbnb host, the price that it recommends that you list your house at depends on your neighborhood, your photos, other prices, the time of year. That's machine learning generated. We're investors in this company called Anki. I don't know if you have it. Who remembers slot cars from the 70s where you could control race cars? The race cars are self-driving cars, right? So if you wanted a self-driving car as a Christmas present, there it is. You can get Anki, it's a self-driving car, machine learning, right? All the robots are basically positioning their course, doing planning, trying to figure out where the other cars are. They have to stay on the track, right? All machine learning, and the cars themselves are $50 MSRP cars, self-driving, right? This crowd probably isn't a big BuzzFeed crowd, maybe not quite the right demographic for how many people, BuzzFeed readers? All right, not quite. All right, we got a few. A lot of the content in BuzzFeed is algorithmically not generated, but there are tools that give feedback for the people creating that content on what will work. Literally, if you're a reporter on BuzzFeed and you're writing a listicle, there are machine learning algorithms that will recommend or make suggestions on how to write the text to get the most click-throughs. So think about that, like your word processor is going to make you a better writer based on machine learning, right? So it's a lot more. Yeah, better is arguable, right? Maybe you didn't need to see the next listicle, right? Stack Overflow. How many programmers in the room are on Stack Overflow, right? So there are algorithms in Stack Overflow that basically predict whether a question will get closed as you're writing it, right? So if you ever get feedback that says, hey, that's not a great question, there's machine learning algorithms in the back that are trying to figure out, hey, the way you phrase that question, is it likely to get closed with a high quality answer? That's being predicted as you're entering the question, right? So all of these things are sort of becoming pervasive, and despite the hype cycle of everybody putting machine learning into there, I think everything is going to get machine learning, and machine learning will be kind of like the Intel inside, which is, look, everybody runs Intel chips because it's just a pervasive part of the infrastructure, and I think ML is going to be like that too, which is the applications that don't use ML will be rare.
Great. Why don't you keep the mic? I'll just speak up, and we'll start with Frank this time. So we talked about companies that you like. We talked about where machine learning is in terms of its market. Can each of you talk about one portfolio company in machine learning or broader big data space that failed? And also talk about why you invested and why do you think it did not work out? And maybe Ken can talk about one company he came across.
They're all VCs, none of our companies.
And we'll start with Frank so that he doesn't have time to think this time.
All right, companies that have failed. Well, we don't like any. Yeah, we're too young, right? So, average time to his outcome is 7 years. We're only 6 years old, so. Yeah, like I don't.
One investment where there was a hard lesson you learned after investing. Oh, shit. Always a learning moment later.
Well,
And
this
if
is
you
a
need
hard
more
one.
time, Sunil is eager.
All right, Sunil's eager. Yeah.
Sunil and Nick have a lot more years. So
Yeah, Frank, you just need another cycle because you're going to learn all the ways that the companies can go wrong. No, there's always reasons that come from different companies, but I think the lesson that I kind of see repeated again and again and again, and this isn't a technology lesson, and it actually has zero to do with ML versus anything else, but there is a thread there actually you could draw, because we're talking about technologies and enabling technologies, and is ML a market in and of itself? Is ML just the AI inside? And I think the takeaway from that really is, understanding what your product is, understanding what it is that you actually do that delivers value to a customer. And I'll tie this back to a specific lesson. Actually, I'll start with a specific lesson, right? We very recently have closed down a company, and the net effect of why this company closed down is for all the fantastic people that were assembled, all the excellent work they did, they never really kept themselves intimately close to the end business value that they were going to deliver to a customer, right? This is the notion of what do you do to achieve product market fit. And they had lots of great feedback on the technology, and they showed fantastic demos, and were able to do wonderful new things with the technology, made real advancements over what other people had done. But that didn't equate to why someone actually was going to part with $1. What business value was solved by that innovation. Tying that back to our conversation about machine learning, I think that's kind of a real risk here, right? Is science and advancement here for the sake of being innovative is not a business. It isn't anything that should scare us off from the advancements that are here. But again, just like throwing machine learning on a pitch for a software company doesn't necessarily make you a machine learning software company. Creating a cool new machine learning technology or saying I've pushed the frontier here means nothing to the person, right? To one of Nick's kids who uses Siri, right, or to someone using Waze or a developer on Stack Overflow, none of those people ever want to see or feel or hear machine learning or deep learning. They want to do what they're trying to do better. And I think that's going to be something very, very important with this technology and this cycle is the business value has to come first, and everything we're talking about here in AI, ML, whether the technique is deep learning or anything else, those are just enablers. And I think that's something that was just kind of very relevant to this company that we're in the process of closing down.
I mean, there's not enough time for me to talk about all my failed companies, so I will try to pull a couple of lessons out of it. And this is relevant to this discussion. Even in the category of big data, which was in its hype cycle 2 years ago or a year ago or 3 years ago, I believe that so much of, and we're an investor in Cloudera, we think it's a great company, we like Trifacta, and so there's good outcomes to be had there, but I will tell you, I think big data as a market is suffering in terms of its ability to get into a broad use of the technology itself, because the access to how you apply it to the mere layman who's not a data scientist is still very difficult. There's still a lot of building blocks that have to be coordinated in order for a marketing person who is not an analyst to make use of it. And there really isn't. We were having a unconference with our executives in the big data category, and one person said, I don't know if you're all old enough, or most of you are old enough to remember FileMaker Pro when it came out. It was the first 4GL database where an assistant at the dentist's office, the receptionist, could use that database to build contact management, to build invoicing, and it was a magical application when it came out. There is no 4GL app right now for Hadoop and the stack that runs on top of it. Maybe some people think they have it yet. FileMaker Pro? Yeah, I mean it is. So we need FileMaker Pro applied to AI, to ML, to deep learning, to Hadoop, in order for these markets to become broad and mainstream. And I think until those apps really come, we're going to have trouble bringing this into a much broader set of use cases.
I'm going to build on that, and I've decided to use a word that I somewhat made up, I suppose. I say consumability. So you can even get your value proposition right. You can even deliver value to the end user, but if they can't actually use it, right, to what you're even saying, then what you actually are is a services company. And no one wants to hear this when you go and talk to your VC, and they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" And well, we have a team of 30 people who help our clients use the app we made. They do not want to hear that, right? And so the gap there is really a consumability gap. And if you bought me a beer, I could tell you lots of stories about how painful this can be as a company, because I've lived it and done it, and it's really hard, and it's not necessarily about machine learning. It's about user experience. It's about design. I mean, and this is a really important lesson to get, especially if you're a deeply technical founder. No one cares about your technology. They don't care. They don't want it in the slide deck. They don't want to hear you talk about it. They're not going to sleep at night thinking about it. They just don't care. And this is really hard for somebody like me who's deeply technical. So I started building a little framework for myself to remind myself, right? People, process, technology. It's an old consulting thing, but if you do it a little different, you say the technology props up the process, right? Good technology can make a process 10 times, 100 times more effective. Then if you take process plus technology, and you give that to a smart person, or maybe even not, if you give that to a person, that can make them 10 or 100 times more effective. And so I began to make sure that I placed a lot of emphasis on the people side, right, and the consumability of the things that I was creating. And yeah, I mean, so that's my build on those riffs.
Yeah, I would just add to what Kent said. I think one of the things that I've realized is that since consumers don't actually want to know this, and the machine learning technologies can't quite get you there by themselves, then you stick humans in between if you're providing a software product, right? And I think if I look back at the investments that I've made that haven't gone well, it's ones where, whether it was in this space or not, it was really a service. The percentage of product versus service was, that I made a mistake in assuming that the product percentage was too high, and as we were moving away from the service component, then the actual true breakout was a lot different. It's been, I think it's time honored. It cuts across different industries. But right now, that's when the pitch has machine learning in it, and then you ask, are there any humans involved in between? And the answer is inevitably yes. And but there's only 30. They're all in this other part of the world where it's very inexpensive. You can make you can sort of make excuses, but ultimately that means the technology isn't getting you where you need to go. And I think that's from an investment standpoint, something that we always have to watch out for. I think on the hardware side, it's also just a gap of understanding, and I think you can't bridge that gap with quote unquote service, because you're providing an end product to someone in this room that wants to open a box, pull out a physical hardware product, put it on or look at it or do something with it. And you can't have a human being there sort of helping them with it. So there it's just a gap that currently exists, and I think there's a number of very interesting companies that are trying to solve that. But in that case, it's really a question for the industry now of, is there a hardware relationship that's going to drive that, or is it more the AI ML software relationships that's going to drive the adoption of this. Because right now there's a huge gap between hardware that can get you what you need to do and the developer kind of capabilities to provide the software that will allow the user experience to be what people want. And only a handful of companies, typically very, very big companies with a lot of resources, have the internal capabilities to do that. Whereas in the future, it should be much more pervasive, and it just isn't yet.
Yeah, I will say the overarching theme everybody talked about is still people failure, right? Team failure. It's ultimately, if you have the right team and the right people in the team, they will figure out how to make a technology work, and from day one develop a technology that they think will be a viable solution that people will use. So, it is like a thing that everybody talks about, team, when you talk to investors, but it is so true. It is that's one fundamental thing that we find over and over, and we invest in later stage companies. Even their teams are which causes companies to fail. And you can fail even if you grow the team, grow a company to like 10, 15, 20 million, it can still fail because the team just got complacent or somebody left and did not see what was going on. So yeah, all of that matters, that, whether you find the technology, whether there's an application around the technology, that you make the right customer, happy with the technology. But ultimately, it really depends on the team. And if you're starting companies, you gotta be careful and be very selective about who you bring on and who you kind of start the company with.
Yeah, to add on to the team, so we spend an hour at our first meeting with an entrepreneur. We'll spend probably 20 minutes on the founder's background. And sometimes that makes them squirm because they want to talk about their product, they want to talk about their go-to-market, they want to talk about financing and all the things they're going to do with the money. But I start with, where were you born? And what are the big life decisions that led you to this point? And how did you meet your co-founder, and how long have you been working with them, right? Because a big ingredient of failure for companies is co-founders breaking up, right? You hear a lot about sort of VCs and founders going sideways. That is very uncommon. What's a lot more common is the co-founders decide they're going to part ways, and that is very, very disruptive to a company. So as we look at companies spending time on the psychology of the founder, the motivations of the founder, how the co-founders met is an incredibly important part of the decision-making process.
Great. Why are data scientists, I'll just speak up, why are data scientists so much in demand? We hear salaries of $500K to $1 million per year for data scientists, and we have portfolio companies that have been looking for hiring data scientists for sometimes for a year, maybe even longer. Either they can find, or they can find somebody who says, hey, I'm going to work out of London and 2 hours a day because I'm booked for the rest of the time, and here's my rate. Why? And do you actually believe this is true? And then why? And do you think the same will happen for, let's just coin the term, machine learning specialists going forward? Maybe Jay can start this time.
I think Nick already answered, right? There's no FileMaker Pro for people working with data. No, I actually believe that, right? I fundamentally think that a lot of the tools and things that's out there really doesn't give you insight into the data, right? All the business intelligence tools that are out there, the BI tools, starting with Cognos and BobJ, there's no intelligence in there, right? There is just visualization and some kind of ways to analyze, tell you, okay, what does this data mean? But there is no analysis, no intelligence. And all the advanced kind of the analytic tools, the machine learning tools are still really complicated for somebody to, even for a data scientist, a lot of people claim they're data scientists, but you ask them, okay, what data do you want to put, regression algorithms versus clustering algorithms? They don't know. So I think that's partly the problem, is that, as some of this technologies, like both in machine learning and advanced analytics kind of gets done, and then there will be companies who will figure out a way to make that simple and actually start providing intelligence, and and allow simple people like us to kind of look at the data and understand, and tell us what it actually means, and muck around with that data. Because up till now, I get nice dashboards, and then it's like, 10 pages of PowerPoints with dashboards from our analysts, and I'm like, I don't get what you're trying to tell me. And so I think a lot of work still has to be done before you get people who don't have a huge statistical background or statistical PhDs can go and really understand what this data is telling you.
Okay, yeah, sure, thanks. So there's the data science workflow process is actually a pretty complicated piece of operational engineering that you have to do these days, and I personally spend a lot of time trying to help people get better at that, more effective, and the place where I'm trying to attack the most is exactly what you were talking about. It's that boundary between the business knowledge, I call it business knowledge, and the data knowledge. Because you can have a data scientist, and I'll answer your question directly as well. You can have a data scientist that totally gets it, knows everything about the data, but knows nothing about data visualization. Well, so do you have a good data user experience person? Well, no one calls that person a data scientist. And the funny thing is that data scientists are everywhere. No one calls them data scientists, though. Some of the best data scientists I've had that have worked for me in projects that I've done were actually ex-economists, right, who had really deep economics backgrounds. And this is a lesson, right? And this is how we go about fixing this problem that you're outlining, is we look beyond sort of the comp sci field, way beyond the comp sci field. In fact, they're the worst data scientists a lot of times, because they think most of them are trained in object-oriented fashion these days, whereas your economist was brought up on building complex spreadsheets, which is a form of functional programming, right? And functional programs happen to scale better in a data science environment. So this is so important, and absolutely, there are a ton of people out there that are getting paid way too much, and it causes all kinds of problems for startups as well, because you go out and you've got this guy who you plucked out, this happened to me, you pluck a guy out of a leading college, he's an economist, you put him on, 18 months later, he's a data scientist, and then someone hires him for triple the salary. Wow, that stinks, and there's nothing you can do, because it's just not in your budget, So, there's hype too, that hype cycle, which is really interesting. I think you said about the adoption cycle trailing the hype cycle basically, which is a really cool visual thing. But the same thing is happening, of course, and this happened before. We've all seen this, guys. 1999, 1998, right? You could say the word, internet, and same thing was happening, right? You were making triple salaries. So anyway, that's sort of my add-on there.
I think the other thing that's happening and why data scientists are in gigantic demand is if you get out of the valley, go east, you run into a bunch of companies that we don't really talk about that much unless they're customers of ours. And these are typically industrial companies that have moved from a business model of selling equipment to now selling equipment plus service contracts to now the next business model, which is uptime. So what they are trying to do is get into the Internet of Things service business, attaching a sensor to their equipment, and then they take the customer's data, and what they want to do is sell that back to them, which is insights to that data. And so but changing a company from equipment to uptime model is a massive trauma to an employee base that doesn't understand what that is and doesn't know what it means to their job. And so they are starting off by hiring little pods of groups that are experimenting with these new business models. GE is certainly front and center in talking about it, but you go across, I have talked to Fortune 500 industrial companies at their executive offsites. They are petrified that a startup from the valley is going to come and knock their business on its tail. And so the executive team is in a panic saying, what do we do? They read the articles, they think, I need Hadoop, I don't even know what it is, but I need it. And I need, yes, and now someone told me about deep learning, and I need that now too. And I got to have a story about how we're going to morph into a new world of being able to sell some level of ongoing service to my customer, and I'm going to give my piece of equipment away at cost because my Chinese competitor is beating me on price. And so that puts tremendous pressure on this new category of labor, because it's not just the valley that's looking for them, it's every industrial company that's trying to transform themselves.
So I'm going to ask one last question and then open it up for the audience. So please prepare your tough questions. I alluded to this earlier. A lot of people think the life of a VC is pretty hot. You're in the hot and happening space. You guys hang around at the right bars, etc. All the deals get done over there, over drinks and everything. So, and entrepreneurs are chasing you for time and everything. Let's flip all of this around. What are your dark days as a venture capitalist? Yeah. By the way, I want to give kudos to Sunil for raising the hand and saying, hey, I'll answer that first.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, so dark days as a venture capitalist is when you get the entrepreneur that has 3 months worth of cash left and is thinking hard about how they maybe should start changing their fundraising strategy. That's probably about an hour and such of the morning. Then there's the people that you've really enjoyed talking to who need your attention in the form of actual follow-up for 4 introductions and 2 diligence meetings, and you haven't been able to do that in the last 3 days, and they are checking their email furiously every hour waiting for a response for you in that next step, and it is crushing you that you can't do it. But the reason that you can't do it is because you've got to get to a lunch meeting with an investor who doesn't really need to know what it is you've done differently in the last year, but they're in town from London, so you have to take them out and spend an hour with them at lunch, making them feel good about what it is you're doing. It's the dark secret of venture capital is it's just as much firefighting as you guys probably do in your day jobs, which is there's too many demands on your time. You want to do well by all of those things. The things that if you really pulled it all away and said, this is what's going to make me great at what I do, which is learning about or thinking about what's happening next and then meeting the people who are going to go make that happen, oftentimes gets crowded and interrupted by the tyranny of the urgent. That's the glamorous life that I tend to lead, and which is why I'll get home tonight at 9:15, I'll catch one of my kids' bedtime, and then I'll sit on my laptop and furiously respond to every single email that's stacked up that I haven't touched all day because I've been going back to back in meetings and phone calls, and I'll wake up and do it again tomorrow. So thank you for listening to me vent.
Okay, David, you go.
Sure. So I don't know how to top that. Sunil had a busy day. So I would just say that a lot of our time is the fun part of the job is when your companies are doing great. But I think that you end up spending an inordinate amount of your time with companies that are struggling in the portfolio, and I think one of the Sunil talked about having to shut down companies or oversee and approve significant layoffs, and that's never that's I've been on working in the company side in a prior life, and it's never good to see those come through, and what that does to the culture of a company is pretty negative. And the unfortunate aspect of that, which I've seen in operations and I've seen in some companies, is that then some of the good people that you wanted to stay, that were really important to sustaining the company, they choose to seek greener pastures, and so I think those are tough. Those are tough. The toughest part of this job. I would also say that running a company and working in a corporate setting is very different than working in a partnership setting. And I think that in companies, especially big ones, you can always run and hide. In smaller in partnerships, it's very hard to do that. And so I think that you have a whole set of benefits of a partnership, but you have a whole set of challenges that companies don't have to deal with. So happy to get into those in another time too. But that's those I would say are the 2 challenges from a VC.
Well, I'll add to that. Seeing your public company portfolios lose value by 40% in a single day, right? Those things happened recently. Or I was having to tell your CEO that, look, you have to get by on the cash you have, so you have to make some kind of reductions in the team. But I think the single biggest challenge of being an investor is that we don't control what the company or the CEO or the management team is doing. We always have to work through influence. We always have to make sure, convince the CEO and the management team and the other board members to kind of go along with whatever you want to do, which you think is the right direction for the company. And that is the hardest challenge yeah, of course, I think what Sunil was saying, that all are valid, and so David, but in my mind, the hardest challenge is that we don't control, and we are not, the buck really doesn't stop with us in a company, even though we might be investors. And there's only two really ways that we can influence the company, right? One, we can stop funding the company. So we are not a funder, so they have to figure out another way to. And two is to get rid of the CEO and bring in a new CEO. And both of those are nuclear options, right? Which you don't want to do. So in some way, then you want to avoid it as much as you can. And to do that, you have to work through influence. You have to kind of get everybody on board with what you think is the right direction.
So for me, the dark days of being an investor, I'll talk about two of them. One I do frequently, and then one less frequently. So the hard thing that I do frequently is I have to say no to people who are raising money, right? So we fund, some small single-digit percentage of the entrepreneurs that we meet, and we are very mindful that, look, when you're an entrepreneur and you're out raising, it's hard. You're facing a lot of rejection. It's a very emotionally charged thing. This is your baby. And unfortunately, I'm in the position that I have to say, 99.99% of the time, sorry, your baby is too ugly for shoes. It is, so it's hard. And we're very mindful that it's very hard being an entrepreneur. So we try to sort of say no in a way that's actually helpful to the business. But I do that frequently. Following up on what Jay said, the thing that we don't do as often but is very, very hard is saying no to subsequent rounds, right? Which is, it's a very negative signal for an entrepreneur not to have an existing investor participate in their rounds, but sometimes you have to. We enter the business thinking that some big fraction of our portfolio will fail. That's sort of the nature of making a venture bet, right? We're not small business loans, we're venture bets. And a lot of venture bets will not pan out because the marketplace doesn't pan out or the team didn't execute for whatever reason. And we're prepared to accept a very high loss rate of a lot of companies not making it. But it's very hard to have that conversation and say, look, we're done. For us, the bet is done. Because for the entrepreneur, the bet is never done, right? And so it's very hard to tell an entrepreneur, hey, look, we think you should just wind the experiment down. The great thing about the Valley is there's no black mark that follows the entrepreneur, right? That's one of the great things about Silicon Valley compared to some other cultures, which is you don't have this big red scarlet letter of shame attached to you if your startup fails. You dust yourself off and you go to the next company. And at the moment, it doesn't feel like that for the entrepreneur, but hopefully they'll come around to that.
I just want to say for the record, I think you've all had it too easy. Having done this for a long time, where do I start? I've had one co-founder who, after 2 years, was taking used switches out of the cabinet and selling them on eBay, pocketing the proceeds. And again, I will not, this is not all on entrepreneurs. I can give you many stories of VCs that have acted badly in moments of crisis and duress, and I'm sure I could be accused of that too. I've had one CEO start an affair with their co-founder a year into the company, and that blew up most of the company's momentum. I've had an executive try to retrade their distribution right at the signing of a DA on an M&A, and saying, I'm not going forward unless I get 3 times what I'm due, and threatening to tube the deal. Attorneys, counters, and this is all over a weekend, right? When this company is out of money, the starting on Monday, and so that's a fun weekend to sleep your way through. I could keep going on and on and on, and so there are, by and large, the entrepreneurs we work with are fabulous, fantastic, unbelievably hardworking, diligent, faithful, and everything that you see in Boy and Girl Scouts. But there, when there's money in play, and sometimes people's worst instincts can come out, not just on the entrepreneur side, but also on the investor side.
Great. So on that note, we're going to open it up to the audience. Please. Yeah. I don't know if that one works.
Hello.
Right.
Taking a cue from your topic, last week in the Fortune magazine, there's an article, "The Day of Reckoning is Coming." Over the last 5 years, 352 billions have been poured into the startups, out of which 101 are billion-dollar Trojan horses. Given where the IPO market is, the way the stock market is crashing, it's a good luck trying to get your money out. So first of all, how is going to impact your investments, and how is it going to impact all this new hype of machine learning, data analytics, and the big data moving forward? How do you see the next 3 years shaping up?
Who wants to go
first? I don't profess to have a crystal ball that's better than anybody else's, in the same way that no one was calling for a market crash or a market correction 3 months ago that would wipe a whole bunch of value out of the technology space. I certainly also don't see anybody talking about the rebound that undoubtedly will happen in the environment we're in. What I would say is as follows. I know that next year versus this year, more companies are going to go shoot their IBM server and move it to Amazon Web Services. That growth isn't going backwards. More people are going to stop using their laptop and start using their iPhone or their mobile device as their primary computing platform next year versus last year. That's not going backwards. There are undeniable changes in how we do things that can't be undone. And I think that's the fundamental substrate of why everything we're doing in the technology investing ecosystem moves forward. But I think it's a fallacy for any of us to think that it moves forward in a straight up and to the right line. We'll overshoot up and we'll overshoot down. But what isn't going to happen is all of a sudden say, oh, these were all just incorrect assumptions. So I think a lot of people who kind of expected riches, whether it is piling into companies at multi-billion-dollar valuations with business models that aren't proven, or even customer value propositions that aren't proven, it may end badly for a lot of those things. That goes without saying. But popular press is very comfortable calling the birth and death of anything on a 1 week news cycle or a 1 month news cycle, and I just think it's borderline irresponsible. More likely, it's just kind of not being very deep thinking when people assume that's really kind of the cycle time in which most of our ecosystem or our industry moves. So I'm bullish about the long term just as much as I'm not willing to call what'll happen next week or the week after in the short term.
I want to just point out one thing, not from the VC side, but just in general, right? 2 billion more people are going to come online by about 2020. You said 3 years. That's only 4 years from now, give or take, right? So 2 billion people, and they're all going to have the power of a smartphone in their pocket. They're all, 2/3 of those people are going, we're talking about 5 billion people, so 2/3 of those people are going to be using smartphones and social networks, 1 degree of separation, online learning, all of these things. We're going to see a wave of potential creativity, of blissful ignorance as well, right? Because they're not tainted by the last 20 or 30 years of stuff. I can't wait to see what's going to happen. I think it's going to be amazing. I'm really bullish on what 2 billion new people coming online can do.
My one quick comment is I actually think this is very healthy. I was an entrepreneur for 12 years before I joined the dark side. So there is no question that when you raise $50 million in your Series B and you haven't finished the product yet, the behavior of your organization changes, and changes not for the right reasons. There is an old saying that starved rats live longer. And companies that have less money and have to prove their business with less runway, behave and act differently, make allocation decisions differently, forecast differently. And when you take that much money, you're taking it at a very high price. And so what you're really selling is a plan that is often completely unrealistic. And so right-sizing the valuations of the later stage will trickle all the way back to Series A and C projects. It just will. The uncapped seed note is gone. Okay, maybe one person gets it, but for the vast majority, they're not getting it anymore. And so I think raising smaller, modest rounds where you really have to prove that you can grow out of operating cash and not just constantly be selling equity as though that will never end. That behavior had to stop. That was a virus. That was a cancer in the industry, and I am glad that that is hopefully going to get truncated now.
When we get up in the morning, we're not looking at the price of the NASDAQ or any public market to inform our investing thinking, right? It's 7.5 years to the average outcome. It's not 7.5 weeks, it's not 7.5 quarters, it's 7.5 years. And so the question we ask ourselves is software done eating the world? And we think in so many areas, software is absolutely not done eating the world, right? Which is, think about how your children go to school. Like, it's literally medieval what they do. We dress people up in funny robes and we lecture at them in classes of 25, right? Think about the way the healthcare system is organized. Think about government. Like, there are so many ways that software can make the world a better place that as long as we believe that to be true, we're going to be long in the future.
Great. I think we have another question there.
Hi, am I audible? Yes. Okay. When you invest as VCs, do you ever worry that when you say that software is eating the world, do you ever worry that somebody is going to throw a spanner in the works by, let's say, people in government or in Congress? They will bring in anti-competitive legislations in order to support the incumbents. Do you take those things into account?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, we've invested in a bunch of companies that we knew were going to run into regulatory headwinds. So think about Lyft or think about Airbnb, right? So it was only a matter of time before the local jurisdictions that control hotels in every city are going to say, wait a minute, we didn't sign up for every person renting out their room as a hotel, right? And we actually like taking a lot of those risks. It takes a certain type of entrepreneur who wants to go straight at a regulated industry and say, that rule is stupid. But like, look at companies like Lyft and Uber and Airbnb. Like, why should we be restricted from renting our hotel rooms, right? If we can make it a safe experience. Why should we be prevented from driving people around cities if we can keep that a safe experience, right? And so it takes a certain breed of entrepreneur, and we absolutely take regulatory risk into account, but we love the entrepreneurs that are brave enough to go after it, because a lot of the rules exist for no good reason, and we should blow them up.
Anybody wants to add to that?
I'll just say in the area of machine learning and artificial intelligence, I do think there will be some legislative issues that come out of that, especially with some of the devices that we will see very soon that may have privacy issues and the like. So, but it's better to be on the other end of that and see how governments react with antiquated laws rather than trying to anticipate and second guess that.
You have invested in drones, which government doesn't even know what to do with this.
Well, they did. They put out some regulations at the end of last year for registration. Any drone bought after, I think, December 20th had to be registered. And one of the nice things about that was, I mean, at least for our company, is that the liability actually goes with, well, not good for all of us, but good for our company, is that the liability is just as buying a car, the liability goes with the owner rather than with the company or the manufacturer. So.
In order to address your issue around consumability, as well as in order to avoid the nuclear options, is there a change in the venture capital model where maybe you bring in-house a group of people from different disciplines like finance, operations, product management, in order to help the tech-heavy entrepreneurial organizations that you invest in as portfolio companies to kind of have these people go to these companies 3 months, 6 months at a time to make sure they're on the right path in order to avoid that situation that you addressed before?
Yeah. So one of the things we have done, we invest in companies that have 5-10 million in revenues, and trying to accelerate growth. And the number 1, 2, and 3 requests we got was customer introduction, customer introduction, customer introduction, right? So we actually set up a team within our within our group that basically goes in and helps our companies land customers, gets them in front of Shell or American Express, things like that. And the biggest thing is, unlike PE guys, we don't charge our companies any money for that. We always sit around and say, yeah, if we were private equity shops, we could go turn around and get like 2%, 3% management fee just for doing that for our portfolio companies. Let's not go there. They can turn like a $200 million investment into $200 million return without really doing anything, right? Exactly. It's a very good business. No, but I will say that if you look at across every VC invests at different stage, and I think the days of just investing capital and leaving it is gone. Right? Because people, all entrepreneurs talk to each other. They know which VCs are helpful, which VCs are not. And if you're going to be long-term greedy, you really need to work with your portfolio companies and help them grow. And what we see, like in the different layers of where people come in, they add different value. Like the early stage guys spend a lot of time focusing on getting the product right, getting the the customer kind of what they're targeting right, getting the team right, all of that stuff. And when we get in, it's mostly about, hey, how can we help you grow and expand and things like that. But it is definitely entrepreneurs know which VC will help you and how they will help you before they take your money, right?
Chime in. We probably are the biggest example of the full-service venture firms, and just some numbers to put that in context. So there are 130 employees at Andreessen Horowitz, which is like crazy large given how many dollars that we're managing. The trick is only 25 of those people work on investments. So 130 minus 25, 105 people are working to help the portfolio companies build big, durable businesses as quickly as possible. So, for example, every year we host something like 2,700 briefings, like what Jay talked about, where a big company meets 6 startups. We do 2,500 of those a year. We know 8,000 of the top executives who have ever worked in tech in every functional role, and we're constantly introducing them to our portfolios. Since the year started, so we're in February, right? We've met 900 computer science students who are interested in working at startups. So the scale at which we're operating and introducing people to our startups is very big. One of the things that we've been mindful of, though, is where do you stop with the advice and the guidance? Because you can't be with your portfolio all the time. And so roles like product management, UI design, data science itself, the dividing line was we set for ourselves is, look, we're not going to do it for you. If you're not good at product design or UI, UX, right, or data science, you're not going to be a very big company. So we're not going to parachute people in there to help you. We'll introduce you to world-class people that you can hire or consultants, but we're not going to try to do it for you, because our theory is that will just lead to companies getting small but not big. Right, which is you try to push your company out of the nest and they never learn to fly themselves. That's not a good picture.
One more question, please. Yeah.
Oh. So the VC landscape is changing, like now in consumer, the 10 million is the new million, for example. But like thinking from your perspective of artificial intelligence, like heavy tech companies, what makes a company fundable for round A in nowadays? Inside the hype and everything. This will be great to know.
I think it's very subjective, and you said A, and I hate to say, I hate to put the letters around things because those tend to be rather artificial constructs. So let me just think about it in terms of maybe where we play and other people can answer from their perspective. So Amplify invests exclusively at the seed in the A round. So we back technical founders going after problems. And so what we need to see is someone we believe that we can work with for 5, 7, 10 years, who we believe has something extraordinary about them, extraordinary insight, an extraordinary ability, an extraordinary experience, something that gives them a clear advantage in order to execute what they want to execute. And we couple that with a very clear vision of a problem that needs to be solved. And really that's what we focus on. Those two things allow us to take we take an extraordinary amount of technical risk. We take an extraordinary amount of risk that markets will or won't develop. We take an extraordinary amount of risk that people will or won't be able to recruit teams. We come in there. And what we are really trying to do is help those people put together a team, drive their initial vision to the simplest form of product market fit. Yes, people who are not my old college roommate or my old boss will pay me money, or even if they're before paying money that I'm delivering value to them. We believe that those are really, really important risk reducers, and then when we do that, then that unlocks further capital. Now, whether that's a seed round or an A round that I just described, I don't know. I don't know what the terminology is. I don't try and keep up with it. But for where we want to get in and what we want to get done, it starts and it finishes with the two things that I began with. Who are you? Why are you fantastic? Do we get along and can we work together? And do we fundamentally believe that you're pointed at something that's worth solving, right? Because from our perspective, if you think about a venture capital investment, two investments where we put in $1 million in each one. We know the downside case of each one of them is identical. We can lose $1 million in both. If one of them has the opportunity to be a $10 million return and the other one has the opportunity to be a $100 million return, well, by definition, we care about that second investment the same every single time. We're much less sensitive if the first one says, yeah, but if it goes poorly, I'll get you back $500,000. The other guy goes, I don't care. It could all go to zero, but if we get it right, it's $100 million. Like, we're going to go to that guy. And that's a pretty good numerical embodiment of that second part of my statement, right? Is this problem worth solving? Is there something worth going after? So that's it for us. I don't know if anyone wants to add on.
I mean, you could do a whole panel just on this. You do a whole semester course, master class. The thing that I always tell people is remember that you're not selling the product to us. You're selling equity, to Sunil's point, and that we are going to put money and we have an expectation of what we want to get out of it, assuming a bunch of failures. And so I think I'm always amazed at how long it often takes for people to get to really making the case for that. And because they want to start at 30,000 feet and talk about, broad macro trends. They start with AI or ML, and it's 30 minutes, and I'm thinking about my laundry and what my wife wanted me to take home for dinner within probably the first 3 minutes. If you haven't hooked me into that this is going to be a special meeting, and that this is going to be a special moment, that you've said something out of the chute that is either something I was looking for or has such novelty and impact to me that I'm now going to sit up and pay attention. Because we do several of these a day, some 5 a week, and you do get a little jaundiced about meetings that don't immediately go to where you want it to go. And so, that's a little bit of the dark side, is that, we often are not really paying close attention if we have decided almost subconsciously we're not going to do this within 30 seconds, a minute. And then once we've made a decision we're interested, then we spend the remainder of the hour reconfirming that initial thought.
Great. One last question.
So, how many of you are using ML or big data in your own decision-making process? How would it impact your industry?
You don't have that much data anyway.
I actually came across a firm, I don't know if you guys know these people, Anand and Venki. They used to be at Walmart Labs, and now they created Jungli, but now they've created a venture fund, Rocketship, Rocketship.vc, and Correlation does that too. So what these guys do is they actually have hired a team of, 4 PhDs from Stanford to do data analysis and look at companies at a global scale, not just Silicon Valley or even US, and do an analysis of, hey, which company is getting some traction, but we don't know about them, and nobody invests in them because they might be sitting somewhere else in the world. And then call those entrepreneurs, say, hey, based on our data analysis, you're doing something right, let's have a conversation. So they actually have flipped the model. Instead of entrepreneurs coming to them, they say, we are reaching out to you outside Silicon Valley, and we're going to find you based on our data analysis. That's probably one recent example to answer your question, and there are some others as well.
That's an analog. That's a really cool question, by the way, but that's an analog of something you'll hear in chess called a centaur, which is any combination of people or machines, whatever you like, 2 computers, 1 chess master, 2 amateurs, 1 really good computer, whatever. The fun thing is that in those competitions where they actually play as centaurs, it's always the best combination of people who know how to use the computers the best that win, not the people who are the smartest or the grandmasters. And I think, I'm not a VC, but there's got to be some analog, and what you're talking about reminded me of that. So I just thought it was worth mentioning. It could be something to investigate.
I have an alternative question that I've been pondering is, when will AI replace me? When is there a venture capitalist bot that has the face that says, thank you for coming, and asks you questions about your business model, and takes the PowerPoint and ingests it, and then spits out an answer and just gets rid of all this headcount?
Wonderful, wonderful. On that note, we're going to say thank you to all the panelists for a very candid discussion and for sharing all your thoughts. Thank you very much for taking your precious time. Thank you, everybody, for coming as well. Hope you enjoyed it.